No shared border. No direct colonial history between them. Not even a common language. And yet, right now, Iran and Israel are at war. Not a shadow war. Not a proxy conflict fought through other people's bodies on other people's soil. Open war. For decades, experts warned this day was coming. Almost nobody predicted how fast it would arrive. To understand why the Middle East will never be the same again, you have to go back over a century. To the collapse of an empire. To promises made in bad faith. To a revolution nobody saw coming. And to a century of rage, fear, and blood that finally exploded into the open. This is the full story. In the year 1900, the Middle East as we know it today simply did not exist. The entire region, from Istanbul to Baghdad, from Damascus to Jerusalem, was controlled by a single power, the Ottoman Empire. A vast Islamic empire that had ruled for over 600 years. But by 1900, it was dying. Corruption had hollowed it out from within. Military defeats had stripped away its prestige. Internal rebellions were tearing it apart. European powers, Britain and France especially, were waiting like vultures, ready to carve up whatever was left. Then came World War I, and the Ottomans made the worst decision in their history. They sided with Germany. When Germany lost in 1918, the Ottoman Empire didn't just lose a war. It ceased to exist. Britain and France moved in immediately. They divided the entire Middle East between themselves, drawing new borders with the casual confidence of men who had never lived there and had no intention of doing so. Borders sliced across ethnic communities, religious groups, and ancient tribal lands as if none of it mattered. Because to them, it didn't. Britain claimed a territory called Mandatory Palestine, a thin strip of land on the eastern Mediterranean coast. Home to a majority Arab Muslim population, a significant Arab Christian minority, and a small but growing Jewish community. It was here, in this tiny piece of land, that the seeds of everything that followed were planted. For centuries, Jewish communities across Europe had lived under the constant shadow of persecution. Pogroms in Russia, discrimination across the continent, violence that seemed to have no end. Out of that suffering, a movement had emerged, Zionism, built on one simple, urgent idea. Jewish people needed a homeland of their own, a place where they could never again be hunted. That homeland, Zionists argued, should be Palestine, the ancient biblical home of the Jewish people. At exactly the same time, Arab Palestinians were living in that land, had been for generations. It was their home too. Britain, with breathtaking cynicism, made promises to both sides. To Arab leaders, support Britain in the war, and you will have independence. To Jewish leaders, through the Balfour Declaration of 1917, Britain supports the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. These promises were not compatible. Britain knew it. They made them anyway. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased dramatically, especially as Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany and persecution of Jews across Europe intensified into something far darker. Arab Palestinians watched the demographics of their homeland shift beneath their feet. Tensions escalated into violence. Britain found itself trapped between two peoples with irreconcilable claims to the same earth and no idea how to resolve it. Then the Holocaust happened. 6 million Jewish people, murdered by Nazi Germany in an industrialized campaign of extermination that stunned the world into silence. International support for a Jewish homeland became impossible to resist. Britain, exhausted, bankrupt, broken by World War II, simply handed the problem to the newly formed United Nations and walked away. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. Within hours, the United States recognized it. The Soviet Union followed. The next morning, 5 Arab armies, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, invaded. Against almost every military prediction, Israel survived. Not only survived, it expanded. By the end of the war, Israel controlled more territory than the UN partition plan had ever allocated. For Israelis, this was the War of Independence, a miracle, the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. Entire villages were erased. A refugee crisis was born that has never, to this day, been resolved. Now, where was Iran in all of this? In 1948, Iran was a constitutional monarchy ruled by a Shah, a king. Iran was not Arab. It was Persian. It had no direct stake in the Palestinian cause the way Egypt or Jordan did. And here is the fact that surprises most people. Iran and Israel, in 1948, had relatively normal diplomatic relations. The two countries cooperated on intelligence. On military matters, they were quiet partners, not enemies. So the real question, The question this entire story is built around is this: how did Iran go from Israel's quiet partner to its most dangerous enemy? The answer starts with oil, and with one of the most consequential acts of cowardice and betrayal in modern history. Through the 1950s, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was a modernizer, pushing Western-style reforms, women's rights, industrialization. Firmly pro-American, firmly anti-communist. But in 1951, the Iranian parliament elected a new prime minister who would change history. Mohammad Mossadegh, hugely popular, democratically elected, and driven by one burning mission: take Iran's oil back from the British. For decades, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later to become BP, had been extracting enormous wealth from Iranian soil. Britain grew rich. Ordinary Iranians saw almost nothing. Mossadegh nationalized the Iranian oil industry. Britain was furious. America was alarmed. And then they did something Iran would never forgive. In August 1953, the CIA and British intelligence launched Operation Ajax, a covert operation to destroy Mossadegh's government. They paid street gangs to cause chaos in Tehran, bribed military officers, orchestrated protests, manufactured a crisis. Within days, Mossadegh's government collapsed. He was arrested. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The Shah, who had actually fled to Rome as events turned against him, was flown back to Iran and restored to power, now more dependent on American support than ever. For Washington and London, it was a strategic victory. Iranian oil was safe. For the Iranian people, it was something else entirely. Their democratically elected leader had been overthrown by foreign powers, not for anything he had done wrong, but to protect foreign oil interests. The humiliation was total, and it was never forgotten. The Shah ruled for the next 2.5 decades, with increasing brutality. His secret police, Savak, imprisoned, tortured, and killed political opponents. Dissent was crushed. Opposition leaders disappeared. But Iran was oil-rich and strategically vital to America's Cold War strategy. Washington looked the other way. Underneath the surface, Iranian society was reaching a boiling point. In 1979, it exploded. Mass protests swept Iran. City after city, millions in the streets. The Shah's government collapsed. He fled the country in January 1979 and died in exile the following year. Into the vacuum stepped Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a radical Shia Islamic cleric who had spent years in exile, preaching a revolutionary ideology that fused Islamic law with fierce opposition to American and Western influence in the Muslim world. When Khomeini landed in Tehran, millions came to welcome him. The Islamic Republic of Iran was declared. A theocracy, a state governed by religious law, led by religious scholars. Almost overnight, the entire character of Iran transformed. Israel's embassy in Tehran was handed over to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And then, in November 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy and took 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 days. The hostage crisis permanently destroyed any possibility of reconciliation between Iran and America, and Iran's hostility toward Israel, backed by America, hardened into unshakable ideological doctrine. Here is the crucial thing to understand. Iran didn't become Israel's enemy because of anything Israel specifically did. Iran became Israel's enemy because the ideology of its new government required it. In September 1980, with Iran weakened by revolution and international isolation, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. Over 1 million people died. America and much of the West quietly backed Iraq. Iran fought with revolutionary fervor, but was outgunned and isolated. The war left 2 lasting marks on Iran's strategic thinking. First, Iran could never again depend on anyone but itself. It needed its own advanced military capabilities, its own weapons program, eventually, its own nuclear deterrent. Second, Iran needed a new way to project power, a way to fight its enemies without ever directly fighting them. The answer was proxy warfare. Iran began funding, training, and arming militant groups across the region, groups that would fight Iran's battles while Iran kept its hands officially clean. The most significant was Hezbollah, founded in Lebanon in 1982 with direct Iranian support. Its stated purpose: resistance against Israel. Iran had invented a new form of warfare, a ring of armed proxies: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, surrounding Israel on all sides, all funded by Tehran, all pointing their weapons at the same target. Iran was fighting Israel. It was just using other people to do it. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Iran developed its nuclear program, officially for civilian energy, but few believed it. A nuclear-armed Iran was Israel's worst nightmare. An ideologically hostile regime, openly calling for Israel's destruction with a nuclear weapon, that was an existential threat Israel could not accept. So Israel fought back. Quietly, Iranian nuclear scientists began dying in mysterious accidents. Assassinations attributed to Israeli intelligence. The Stuxnet computer virus, believed to be a joint American-Israeli creation, physically destroyed Iranian centrifuges from the inside. A weapon of code that caused physical machinery to tear itself apart. Iran responded by expanding its proxy network. And then, in 2015, a brief window opened. The Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, offered a diplomatic off-ramp. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for lifting international sanctions. Israel furiously opposed it, argued it didn't go far enough. In 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal. This is where the story becomes genuinely contested. International monitors had repeatedly certified that Iran was in full compliance. Every other signatory, Britain, France, Germany, China, Russia, urged Trump to stay. He withdrew anyway. The consequences were severe. Stripped of the sanctions relief the deal had promised, Iran abandoned its own commitments and accelerated its nuclear program. The world ended up in a worse position than before the deal had ever existed. We cannot tell this story honestly without stopping here. October 7, 2023, Hamas, funded, armed, and supported by Iran, launched the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. 1,200 Israelis killed, 250 taken hostage, families slaughtered in their homes. A music festival turned into a massacre. Israel's response was ferocious. A ground invasion of Gaza followed. By the end of 2024, over 40,000 Palestinians had been killed, the majority of them women and children, according to Gaza's health authorities. The United Nations called the humanitarian situation catastrophic. International legal scholars began using a word that Israel categorically rejected: genocide. Neither side in this conflict has clean hands. But the Gaza war accelerated everything. It activated Iran's entire proxy network. It radicalized populations across the region. And it gave Israel's government the political mandate to pursue its enemies, including Iran itself, more aggressively than at any point in its history. In September 2024, Israel executed one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history. Israeli agents had spent years establishing a fake company in Hungary to manufacture pagers for Hezbollah, secretly embedding explosives inside the batteries. On September 17th, thousands of pagers exploded simultaneously across Lebanon and Syria. 42 dead, over 4,000 wounded. Hezbollah's biggest security catastrophe in its history. The following day, walkie-talkies exploded in a second wave. Days later, Israeli intelligence tracked Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader for over 30 years, one of the most powerful figures in the entire Middle East, to an underground bunker buried 60 feet beneath a residential building in Beirut. On September 27, 2024, the Israeli Air Force dropped 80 bombs on that building in a single strike. The bunker was obliterated. The apartment blocks above it collapsed into rubble. Nasrallah was killed. Along with him, senior Hezbollah commanders and an Iranian Revolutionary Guard general sent by Khomeini himself to warn Nasrallah his life was in danger. The warning arrived too late. Iran's ring of proxies, built over 40 years at enormous human and financial cost, was being systematically dismantled. Iran was faced with a stark choice: watch its entire regional strategy collapse or escalate directly. It chose escalation. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military campaign against Iran. Operation Epic Fury. American B-2 stealth bombers struck Iran's ballistic missile facilities. Israeli jets hit targets across all 31 of Iran's provinces simultaneously. Key sites in Tehran were destroyed, including the state broadcaster and the historic Golestan Palace, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Along with him, multiple senior commanders. The architect of Iran's entire regional strategy, gone. The civilian cost was devastating. A U.S.-Israeli airstrike struck a girls' school in southern Iran, killing at least 165 children. Iran retaliated immediately. Drone and missile attacks across the entire region, hitting the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Iran's Revolutionary Guard declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, one of the world's most critical oil shipping lanes, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned, the hardest hits are yet to come. What happens next? Nobody knows. Will Iran's government survive, or will its own people rise up in the chaos? Will the Strait of Hormuz reopen, or will the global economy spiral into energy crisis? Will this remain a two-country war, or will it drag the entire region into the fire? But here is what we do know. Everything you are watching right now, every missile, every drone, every burning city, has roots that stretch back over a century. To an empire that collapsed and left a power vacuum. To colonial powers who drew borders and made promises they knew were lies. To a coup that overthrew a democracy to protect oil profits. To a revolution that turned a partner into an enemy. To decades of proxy war, assassination, and a nuclear standoff that kept getting worse every time someone tried to solve it. The bombs are still falling. The fires are still burning. And nobody, not in Washington, not in Jerusalem, not in whatever remains of Tehran, knows how this ends. But now you know how it started.